Strategy plus a blood plus battle plus a kill plus a no system. Ying Zifeng, a graduate student at the University of Medical Sciences, traveled to the Great Qin Empire and became the 15th son of Zulong. In order not to die with the downfall of the Qin Dynasty, Ying Zifeng decided to embrace the thigh of the ancestral dragon. On the day of Zulong's birthday, Ying Zifeng presented the 6 flavors Emperor Pill. Ying Zifeng said, "This elixir is called the 6 flavors Emperor Pill. The 6 flavors represent the 6 kingdoms, and unifying the world is the emperor. This is an elixir that can only be enjoyed by talented and strategic masters like Father Zulong. I really like this elixir." And Ying Zifeng's inventions and creations go far beyond this. He invented stirrups and horseshoes to arm the iron cavalry of the Great Qin, invented leverage to liberate millions of people, invented papermaking, and from then on, Ying Zifeng embarked on a path of helping Zulong maintain health while using his inventions and creations to help Zulong rule the Great Qin and expand territory to create the world of the Great Qin. Chapter 1. Offering Immortal Pills. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the 32nd year of Emperor Shi, in January, Xiongnu Palace. In the magnificent hall, Ying Zifeng knelt at the banquet table somewhat unaccustomed and quietly looked at the majestic figure sitting on the high platform, dressed in Xiongnu and wearing a high-ranking crown, carefully scrutinizing it. It's not in vain to have traveled this time to see Xiongnu with my own eyes. Ying Zifeng was originally a graduate student at the 21st Century Medical University. Due to a car accident, he accidentally traveled to the Qin Empire under the rule of Ying Zheng and became his 15th son, Ying Zifeng. Ying Zifeng was very happy at first about crossing the sand dunes to become the son of the first emperor of Qin, because he could enjoy himself in Xiongnu Palace by virtue of this identity. But he was not happy when he thought of the killing measures taken by Hu Hai against their brothers and sisters after Ying Zheng died of illness in 5 years. This is a difficult time to travel through, and he hasn't enjoyed a few years yet. He doesn't want to die young. After much thought, Ying Zifeng realized that if he wanted to live longer, there seemed to be only one way, which was to make Ying Zheng live longer. As long as Ying Zheng, who was the first emperor, sat in his position for a day, the people below would never dare to do anything inappropriate, and he could naturally live and enjoy an extra day. Coincidentally, today is the birthday of Emperor Shi, and all the courtiers are going to offer congratulations to Ying Zheng. As a graduate student at the University of Medical Sciences, Ying Zifeng immediately decided to bring a small health shock to everyone. Just as Ying Zifeng was thinking about these things, a young figure in splendid attire suddenly stood up among the courtiers at the forefront. He walked up to the high platform, picked up a brocade box with both hands, and said, "My son, Fu Su, congratulates my father and emperor. I would like to offer a pair of exquisite jade." Upon hearing Fu Su's words, Ying Zheng nodded lightly and said, "Good." After offering congratulatory gifts in Fusu, the sons of Ying Zheng came forward to offer their gifts. "I offer a piece of jade to congratulate my father, the emperor. My son congratulates his father on the emperor." One after another, Ying Zheng's dozen or so sons appeared one after another, creating a harmonious and lively atmosphere. As the 15th son, Ying Zifeng should have been ranked 15th to appear and offer gifts, but as the 18th son, Hu Hai was proud of his favor and took the lead when Ying Zifeng was about to appear. My son Hu Hai congratulated his father and presented a fairy pill. As an emperor, Ying Zheng often sees treasures such as jade, stones, and artifacts on a daily basis. Therefore, when his sons presented congratulatory gifts, he showed great composure. But when Hu Hai said he wanted to offer a fairy pill, Ying Zheng's face finally changed. Over the years, he has made several tours, on the one hand to show the emperor's authority and intimidate the young people from all directions, and on the other hand to visit famous mountains and rivers, seek to visit immortals, and seek the elixir of immortality. For this reason, he recruited alchemists and sorcerers everywhere, and asked them to refine elixirs for him. After taking them for several years, not only did they fail to produce any effect, but their health deteriorated. This really made Ying Zheng feel a little annoyed. However, even so, he still did not give up and continued to take the elixir offered by local scholars, hoping to live forever. On today's birthday, Hu-Hai, as his most beloved youngest son, did not offer ordinary treasures like his brothers. Instead, he presented a fairy pill, which inevitably made Ying curious. He looked at Hu-Hai and asked, "Hu-Hai, where does your elixir come from?" Upon hearing this, Hu-Hai replied, "To my father, the day before yesterday my son was out hunting and met an old man in the forest. He gave this elixir to my son and ordered him to present it to him." Upon hearing Hu-Hai's answer, Ying immediately asked, "Where is that old man?" Hu-Hai shook his head and replied, "After the old man handed the elixir to his son, he turned around and disappeared without a trace." In recent years, Ying has visited Immortals on his travels and heard too many similar stories, but he doesn't think there is any problem with what Hu-Hai said. Beside Ying, as a eunuch, Zhao Gao, the commander of the Zhongche mansion, couldn't help but feel a bit proud as he watched the change in expression on Ying's face. Over the years, he has often accompanied Ying and is well aware of his persistence in the elixir of immortality. That's why he specially arranged for Hu-Hai to present the so-called elixir to win the favor of Ying. Moreover, in order to make this elixir different from other elixirs, he specially asked the alchemist to add more mercury and cinnabar to make the elixir more round and full. I believe Ying would love it very much. Just as Zhao Gao had imagined, when Ying saw this specially crafted elixir that was clearly one circle larger than other elixirs, a smile finally appeared on his majestic face and he said, "Great goodness." Under the stage, Hu-Hai couldn't help but show a hint of joy on his face when he heard Ying say, "Great kindness." Behind him, Ying Zifeng looked at the scene before him, and his expression couldn't help but become somewhat strange. He didn't expect that the gift prepared by Hu-Hai for Ying was also a fairy pill. And the reason why he said it was also is because the gift he prepared for Ying was also a fairy pill. Just as Ying Zifeng thought about these things, Hu-Hai had already stepped down with satisfaction. Upon seeing this, Ying Zifeng immediately stood up and walked forward, loudly saying, "My son, I would like to offer you a fairy pill to congratulate your father, Emperor." On the high platform, Ying was bowing his head to admire the elixir presented by Hu-Hai, without even caring about his 15 sons who usually had little presence. However, when he heard Ying Zifeng say the words, "Immortal pill," he instinctively looked up and looked at Ying Zifeng with a surprised expression on his face. Surprisingly, there is still a fairy pill. Not only Ying, but also the courtiers present with extremely surprised expressions on their faces at this moment. Especially Zhao Gao, he never expected that someone would come up with him and try to win the favor of Ying with immortal elixirs. And Hu-Hai, who was originally full of smiles, now restrained his smile and showed a surprised expression. He looked at the back of Ying Zifeng, who had been bullied by him all day, and couldn't help but feel very angry in his heart. This guy dares to offer the immortal pill like him and steal his attention. He will definitely be dealt with severely afterwards. Just as everyone was surprised, Ying spoke up and said, "Bring the elixir." Zhao Gao followed the order and immediately walked off the high platform, took the brocade box from Ying Zifeng's hand, and then returned to the high platform to present the brocade box to Ying. Ying opened the brocade box and saw a black and round pill the size of an egg yolk, with a strong medicinal smell almost overwhelming his face. He glanced at the elixir a few times, then at the elixir offered by Hu-Hai, and then turned his majestic gaze to Ying Zifeng, asking, "Where did your elixir come from?" Facing Ying's oppressive gaze, Ying Zifeng replied, "To report to my father, the day before yesterday, I received a dream from a fairy and obtained the immortal formula. I personally refined this elixir according to the immortal formula." Chapter 2. 6 Flavors Emperor Pills. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What kind of immortal dreams, what kind of immortal formula? These are all lies fabricated by Ying Zifeng himself to enhance the power of the immortal pill. In fact, this is just the 6 flavors Remania pill he created based on years of medical experience. However, in the Great Qin Empire, compared to things refined with mercury and cinnabar, these 6-flavored Rehmannia pills can indeed be considered true elixirs. Just as Ying Zifeng thought about these things, Ying Zheng frowned and asked, Immortal daydreaming. Are you telling the truth? Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng immediately nodded and said, it's absolutely true. Without waiting for Ying Zheng to ask again, Ying Zifeng continued, this elixir is called the 6 flavors Emperor Pill. The 6 flavors represent the 6 kingdoms, and unifying the world is the emperor. The immortals are using this elixir to praise the great achievements of their father, and only those who are talented and strategic like the father are eligible to enjoy this elixir. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's explanation, Ying Zheng couldn't help but show a big smile on his majestic face, praising him repeatedly, okay. Okay. In the past, those alchemists and sorcerers offered elixirs, and he had to first test the medicine for the attendants around him before taking it himself. The alchemists and sorcerers had no explanation about this. This elixir, which only emperors can enjoy, is the first time he has heard of it, the first time he has seen it. I really liked the name Lu Wei Emperor Pill. When the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty saw Ying Zheng laughing heartily, they couldn't help but turn their gaze to Ying Zifeng. Over the years, there have been countless people refining elixirs for Ying Zheng, but Ying Zifeng is still the first to excel in naming elixirs. Ying Zifeng and Hu Hai each presented a fairy pill. In terms of name, Ying Zifeng's 6 flavors Rehmannia pill is really brilliant. As for the fairy's dream theory, as long as Ying Zheng is happy, they don't care whether it's true or false. However, some people don't think so, such as Hu Hai. He originally thought he could stabilize many brothers with his immortal elixir, but unexpectedly, he was suppressed by Ying Zifeng in turn. He was used to bullying Ying Zifeng all year round, how could he watch him take away the limelight that should have belonged to him? Immediately, Hu Hai stood up and walked down the stage again, saying, Father, I believe that the elixir offered by Zifeng cannot be taken. Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, Ying Zheng asked, why do you say that? Hu Hai replied, since ancient times, elixirs have always been refined by immortals or alchemists. Zifeng is just an ordinary person. Even if he receives a dream from the immortal, how can he easily refine elixirs? At this point, Hu Hai paused briefly and added, if everyone can refine elixirs, what else would immortals do? Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, Ying Zheng couldn't help but show a deep reflection on his face. Upon careful consideration, what Hu Hai said is not without any reason. Even an ordinary person who hands him a sword that cuts iron like mud cannot immediately become a highly skilled general. Ying Zifeng is an ordinary person. Before this, he had never heard that Ying Zifeng knew the art of alchemy. Now, it is unlikely that he can refine immortal pills solely by relying on a pill granted by a fairy through a dream. On the side, Zhao Gao saw the change in expression on Ying Zheng's face and turned his head to give Hu Hai an appreciative look. He never expected that Hu Hai, who had always only known how to eat, drink, and play, could come up with this insight. Hu Hai couldn't help but feel a bit proud in the face of Zhao Gao's admiration in his eyes. He just casually fabricated a reason to prevent Ying Zifeng from taking away his limelight, but to his surprise, he was actually overheard by his father. As for the civil and military affairs of the Manchu dynasty, they were all quiet and silent at this moment. The dispute between Hu Hai and Ying Zifeng is the family business of the first emperor, and these foreign ministers naturally shouldn't be too talkative. Moreover, as it concerns the elixir, talking too much is useless. They just need to watch the excitement quietly. Beside Hu Hai, Ying Zifeng couldn't help but sneer as he looked at Zhao Gao and Hu Hai, who were wandering around like no one else. Since he had decided to offer the 6 flavors Emperor Pill, he naturally considered all aspects carefully. How could he give up this opportunity to win the attention and trust of the first emperor just because of Hu Hai's few doubts? With these thoughts in mind, Ying Zifeng took another step forward and said, Father, I can guarantee my life. There is absolutely no problem with these 6 flavors Emperor Pills. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Ying Zheng, who was feeling suspicious, instinctively looked up and looked at him. Ying Zifeng faced Ying Zheng's deep gaze and continued, as long as father stops taking other elixirs and specializes in taking these 6 flavors emperor pills, within a month, there will be miraculous effects. Seeing Ying Zifeng's confidence, Ying Zheng couldn't help but ask, are you serious about this? Since pursuing the elixir of immortality more than 4 years ago, he has been taking several elixirs, even more than 10, every day. However, no matter how many elixirs he takes, his physical condition has not improved at all. Instead, it has become increasingly worse, which has raised many doubts about these elixirs in his heart. Now that Ying Zifeng has the confidence to experience the miraculous effect of Lu Wei Emperor Pill within a month, he is inevitably surprised and hopeful. After all, his own physical condition is still very clear in his heart. If we continue like this, we may not be able to sustain it for a few years. Faced with Ying Zheng's question, Ying Zifeng confidently replied, if my father only takes the 6 flavors emperor pill and it doesn't work for a month, I am willing to let my father handle it. The reason why Ying Zifeng is so confident is not because he has confidence in the efficacy of the 6 flavors emperor pill, but because he firmly believes that as long as Ying Zheng stops taking the so-called immortal pills refined with toxins such as cinnabar and mercury, even if he doesn't take any other medicine, his body will gradually improve. In this situation, if combined with 6 flavors emperor pills for health preservation, it is strange if there is no miraculous effect. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's response, Ying Zheng immediately said in a deep voice, okay. I'll just listen to you once, specializing in serving the 6 flavors Emperor Maru for a month. Upon hearing Ying Zheng's words, Hu Hai was greatly surprised and quickly said, Father, absolutely not. Ying Zifeng saw that Hu Hai was still trying to stop Ying Zheng, so he immediately said, 18 younger brothers, I am seeking the law of longevity for my father, which is a good thing to prolong life. Why have you repeatedly discouraged me? What is the reason for this? Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Ying Zheng couldn't help but turn his gaze to Hu Hai. Faced with the cold, deep, and intimidating gaze that Ying Zheng looked at, Hu Hai couldn't help but kneel on the ground and defend himself in fear. Father, I didn't mean to stop father from seeking immortality, I just feel that this method is not appropriate. At this moment, Zhao Gao saw that Ying Zheng was going to be angry with Hu Hai, so he couldn't help but stand up and said, Your Majesty, the 18 young master is also out of filial piety. For your consideration, please calm down your anger. Chapter 3. Successfully Holding Thighs. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Upon hearing Zhao Gao's words, Ying Zheng looked at his beloved little son kneeling on the ground and let out a cold snort. After all, he didn't say anything more. Just because of this incident, my favorability towards Hu Hai inevitably declined. Zhao Gao saw the opportunity and continued, I think it would be safer for the 15 young master to present the prescription of the 6 flavors emperor pill to the alchemist specifically responsible for refining it. Zhao Gao's proposal may seem reasonable, but in reality, it was cunning and ruthless, directly hitting Ying Zifeng's vital point. After all, what Emperor Shi cares about is only elixirs, and the alchemists may not necessarily be Ying Zifeng. Off stage, upon hearing Zhao Gao's words, Ying Zifeng couldn't help but inwardly curse Zhao Gao as an old fox. This prescription is his future livelihood guarantee, how could he easily hand it over? Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng arched his hand and said, Father, this elixir is bestowed by immortals and is only in the minds of my courtiers. It cannot be spread externally. At this point, Ying Zifeng paused for a moment and said, taking a step back, even if this elixir can be passed down externally, once it is written on bamboo slips to let others know the secrets of this immortal family, it is feared that the person who will enjoy this elixir in the future will not be the only one, Father. After finishing speaking, Ying Zifeng looked up at Zhao Gao, as if implying to Ying Zheng that Zhao Gao had an intention to steal the secret of immortality. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Ying Zheng's eyes followed Ying Zifeng's gaze and turned to Zhao Gao standing aside. Faced with Ying Zheng's suspicious gaze, Zhao Gao immediately knelt down like Hu Hai, kowtowed repeatedly, and panicked in his defense, saying, "It was Wei Chen who was not careful and almost made a big mistake. Wei Chen deserves to die. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." At this moment, Zhao Gao's heart was filled with fear and regret. If he had known that speaking to help Hu Hai would have set him on fire, then he wouldn't have dared to speak too much. Ying Zifeng took a deep look at Zhao Gao, who was kneeling on the ground and trembling all over, and said coldly, "I will punish you with 3 years of salary as a warning. If you do it again, you will definitely be beheaded and not pardoned." Upon hearing this, Zhao Gao immediately burst into tears of gratitude and said, "Thank you very much, Your Majesty, for sparing your life. Thank you very much, Your Majesty, for sparing your life." Seeing this, although there was no change in his expression, Ying Zifeng still felt somewhat regretful in his heart. If Ying Zifeng directly killed Zhao Gao, it would be a happy situation for everyone. Unfortunately, Ying Zifeng still favored Zhao Gao in his heart and did not substantially punish him. It seems that if he wants to eliminate Zhao Gao, the culprit who will cause the collapse of the Great Qin Empire in the future, he needs to find other opportunities. As for Hu Hai, without Zhao Gao, an old fox behind the scenes, there would be no need to worry. The silent Prime Minister Li Si glanced at Zhao Gao, who was almost beheaded, and couldn't help but turn his head to look at the thin and weak Ying Zifeng again. In his impression, Ying Zifeng has always been a silent, bullied person with little presence. But today, with just 2 words, Ying Zifeng put immense pressure on Hu Hai and Zhao Gao, almost having their heads chopped off. His meticulous thinking forced him to take a fresh look and he couldn't help but feel a bit puzzled. Is it true that a fairy entrusted Ying Zifeng with a dream, not only granting him a pill, but also helping him open his mind? At this moment, not only Li Si, the Prime Minister of the Great Qin, looked at Ying Zifeng with admiration, but other people such as Meng Tian, Meng Yi, and Gongzi Fusu also changed their views on Ying Zifeng due to today's events. This Ying Zifeng looks thin and weak, without much aggressiveness, but in his words, his aggressiveness is directly exaggerated. That is to say, Hu Hai and Zhao Gao are both highly favored by the first emperor. If it were someone else, they would have already lost their heads. If the 6 flavors emperor pill presented by Ying Zifeng can truly bring miraculous effects to the first emperor, it is feared that no one can shake Ying Zifeng's position in the heart of the first emperor in the future. Just as everyone was thinking about these things, Ying Zifeng spoke up again and said to Ying Zifeng, "From now on, you will move to the side hall next to my dormitory, and General Zhang Han will be responsible for protecting your safety." Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng immediately arched his hand and said, "No." He was helpless in the Qin Empire, and now that he had embraced the thigh of the first emperor with the 6 flavors emperor pill, he naturally had to hold it tightly. When everyone heard Ying Zifeng's order, they all showed such expressions on their faces. Ying Zifeng offered the elixir with reason and evidence, which was convincing. In order to protect the secret of the elixir, Emperor Shi naturally placed Ying Zifeng by his side to protect it. In this way, Ying Zifeng had the opportunity to approach the first emperor, and his position in the palace was likely to greatly improve in the future. As for Hu Hai, who used to be favored, his future life may not be as easy. After the banquet, Zhang Han, the commander of the Imperial Guard next to Emperor Shi, personally accompanied Ying Zifeng to the remote palace, packed all the necessary equipment, and then returned to Emperor Shi's palace. At this moment, Ying Zifeng is waiting for Ying Zifeng's arrival in the palace. Ying Zifeng looked at Ying Zifeng walking up in front of him and slowly reached out to push the brocade box containing the 6 flavors emperor pills towards him, saying, "Eat it." Previously, in front of the courtiers, Ying Zifeng maintained the dignity between father and son and did not let Ying Zifeng test the medicine in public. However, now in private, he still needs to let Ying Zifeng personally test the medicine before he can rest assured. Ying Zifeng had long anticipated that the first emperor could not trust him completely just because he said a few nice words, and the trial of medicine was completely within his expectations. So after Emperor Shi spoke up, Ying Zifeng didn't hesitate much and walked forward to reach out and pick up the 6 flavors emperor pill from the brocade box. He held and kneaded these 6 imperial pills in his hand, and in no time they turned into a dozen or so small balls. Then he put them one by one into his mouth and swallowed them all. Ying witnessed with his own eyes that Ying Zifeng had eaten the entire 6 flavors emperor pill and asked, I have asked you to test the medicine with your own body. Will there be any complaints in your heart? Ying Zifeng shook his head and sincerely replied, there are no complaints. It's just that if there is another time, I hope Father can give my children a bowl of water. This dry throat is a bit choking. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's answer, Ying couldn't help but burst into laughter and gestured for Zhang Han to pass a bowl of water to Ying Zifeng. Ying Zifeng was not polite either. He took the bowl and took it off with a thud, which made his throat feel a bit more joyful. Upon seeing this, Ying stood up and walked over to Ying Zifeng. He lightly patted Ying Zifeng's shoulder and said, I will not mistreat any meritorious minister. In a month, if my health really improves, I will never lose your reward. Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng immediately said, Thank you very much, Father. Chapter 4. Kill all the Xiongnu, isn't that enough? You are listening at novelfull.audio. After personally testing the medicine by Ying Zifeng and observing that there were no abnormal conditions, Ying finally let go of his worries and prepared to give up swallowing other elixirs and take the 6 flavors emperor pill as per Ying Zifeng's words. Although refining the 6-flavored emperor pills only requires 6 types of medicinal herbs, in order to ensure that the formula of the 6-flavored emperor pills is not leaked, Ying Zifeng specifically instructed Zhang Han to move all the medicinal herbs in the pharmacy to the side hall in a certain proportion. At this point, even if Ying Zifeng had truly settled down in this side hall, he began to work tirelessly to refine the 6 flavors emperor pill for Ying. In order to better let the first emperor keep healthy, Ying Zifeng also specially brought soybeans and polished them into juice. Every morning, he provided the first emperor with a bowl of fermented sour milk made from ground mung bean while gold juice for defecation and detoxification. In addition, Ying Zifeng also instructed Zhang Han to send people to the southwest region to search for possible green beans. After all, most of the toxins accumulated in the body of Emperor Shi are heavy metal toxins, and the detoxification effect of mung beans is better. For several days, Ying Zifeng presented a 6 flavors emperor pill to the first emperor at noon every day. On this day, as usual, he walked into the Zhongtai palace carrying a pill. Unexpectedly, besides Emperor Shi handling government affairs and reviewing memorials in the Zhongtai palace today, there are also others present. Prime Minister Li Si, Inner Censor Meng Tian, Tungu Marquis Wang Ben, Zhongcha Prefect Zhao Gao, all 4 of them stood on stage, while the young masters Fusu and Hu Hai knelt on one side like students to listen. Father Emperor. Ying Zifeng approached with the pill in hand. Emperor Shi saw Ying Zifeng approaching and nodded lightly, saying, Come here, sit down. Since he started taking the 6 flavors emperor pill, he can clearly feel that his daily energy and complexion are getting better and better. Therefore, his attitude towards Ying Zifeng, who used to be less concerned about the 15 sons, has also become increasingly positive. On the side, Hu Hai saw Ying Zifeng walk up to the table of the first emperor and sit down, with a hint of jealousy on his face. This should have been his honor. After sitting down, Ying Zifeng began to knead the 6 flavors emperor pills into small balls. Ying then turned his gaze to Li Si and the others, saying, I have summoned all the beloved ministers here today to fight against the Xiongnu. When it came to the Xiongnu incident, Ying couldn't help but think of the Immortal book that the alchemists had brought back from the Immortal mountain when they went out to sea. On the Immortal book, there is a prophecy recorded. Those who perish in Qin, Hu Yi. In Ying's view, this Hu necessarily refers to the Xiongnu in the north. Also, in order to prevent the Xiongnu from moving south and invading the border of the Great Qin, Ying decided to send a general to attack the Xiongnu to the north, seize the land of Hetao south of the Yellow River, build the Great Wall, and resist the Xiongnu. In Ying's mind, there were only 2 people who could shoulder this great responsibility, namely Meng Tian and Wang Ben. Just as Ying Zifeng thought of these, Meng Tian had already taken the initiative to speak up and said, "Your Majesty, I am willing to lead a large army northward to resist the Xiongnu." Wang Ben immediately spoke up and said, "I am also willing to go." Ying Zifeng glanced at Wang Ben and then turned his gaze to Meng Tian, saying, "Since it was Meng Yiqing who first requested the order, let Meng Yiqing take on this heavy responsibility." Upon hearing this, Meng Tian immediately bowed and said, "Thank you very much, Your Majesty." Wang Ben had a helpless expression on his face, and since the first emperor had said so, he naturally wouldn't say more. Ying Zifeng looked at Meng Tian and said, "Within 2 months, I will gather 300,000 troops and 500,000 soldiers for you. After capturing the land of Hetao, you will station there and urge the soldiers to build the Great Wall." Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's order, Meng Tian immediately agreed, "No." At this moment, Prince Fusu, who had been listening, couldn't help but stand up and said, "Father, I have objections." The first emperor had Prince Fusu and Hu Hai attend to the handling of government affairs, intending to cultivate both of them. When he saw Fusu raise objections, he asked, "Do you have any objections?" Sitting next to Emperor Shi, Ying Zifeng turned his head and glanced at Fushu. Without a doubt, he knew that Fushu must have had objections because of the recruitment of commoners. As Ying Zifeng had guessed, Fusu spoke up directly and said, "Father, the world has finally settled, and there is still room for improvement. We should make the people rest and recuperate, and not waste their resources anymore. Since the unification of the world, Emperor Shi has been recruiting people, 300,000 to build palaces, 300,000 to build ditches and water conservancy, and 500,000 to build roads. In today's world, the people are already suffering unbearably, filled with grievances. It would be better if 500,000 soldiers were recruited to be responsible for logistics work for the army. If it takes several more years to build the Great Wall, it may further intensify the conflict between the court and the people." Upon hearing Fu Su's suggestion, Ying Zifeng's face darkened and he said, "Fu Su, you only know how to empathize with the people, but you don't know how many people will be devastated and displaced if the Xiongnu go south." Of course, Fu Su understood what Ying Zifeng meant, but he couldn't help but say, "However, Father, the people are really suffering too much." Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng was furious and immediately slapped the case, saying, "Outdated." At this moment, Hu Hai stood up under Zhao Gao's gaze and said, "Father, calm down. Big brother is just momentarily confused. Please don't blame him, Father." Ying Zifeng turned his gaze to his beloved little son and said, "Do you think I should order Meng Yiqing to attack the Xiongnu and build the Great Wall?" Upon hearing these words, Hu Hai immediately expressed his position and said, "The northern attack on the Xiongnu and the construction of the Great Wall have been a great achievement for the benefit of the country and the people, and I firmly support my father's decision." Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, Ying Zifeng's anger softened slightly, and he glanced at Fu Su with some disappointment. This eldest son is good at everything, but he is too feminine. "Father, please take the medicine." At this moment, Ying Zifeng suddenly spoke up and placed the 6 imperial pills that had been kneaded into small pieces in a jade plate, presenting them to the first emperor. Ying Zifeng turned his head to look at Ying Zifeng and asked, "Zifeng, do you think there is a problem with my decision?" He hopes that his sons can understand his good intentions, rather than being short-sighted like Fusu. Ying Zifeng faced Ying Zheng's gaze and answered seriously, "I believe that my father's decision is not a problem. The Xiongnu were a major threat to the empire, and we should send troops to eliminate them in order to prevent future troubles." Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's answer, Ying Zheng's face immediately showed satisfaction. However, at this moment, Ying Zifeng suddenly changed his tone and said, "However, I believe that the construction of the Great Wall is not urgent at the moment." Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Hu Hai immediately intervened and said, 15 brothers, how could you be so confused? How can you resist the Xiongnu without building the Great Wall?" Ying Zifeng glanced at Hu Hai and calmly said, "Kill all the Xiongnu, isn't that enough?" Chapter 5. Agreed Competition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the main hall, when everyone heard Ying Zifeng casually say that he would kill all the Xiongnu, their expressions immediately became extremely strange. The Xiongnu occupied vast grasslands with no fixed abode, wandering back and forth. They had numerous and fierce cavalry, but it was not easy to kill them all. Ying Zifeng's words were no different from a joke. And Hai couldn't help but burst into laughter upon hearing this, saying, 15 brothers, is this your unique insight? Kill all the Xiongnu. Kill them with your mouth. Hai seized this opportunity and mocked Ying Zifeng to the fullest, venting all the grievances he had suffered at the banquet a few days ago at this moment. And Emperor Shi's gaze at Ying Zifeng changed from expectation to disappointment. Although Ying Zifeng is not as cliché as Fu Su, his knowledge is too shallow to make such a joke. If this matter is spread, I'm afraid Ying Zifeng will become the laughing stock of the world. At this moment, Meng Tian couldn't help but say to Ying Zifeng, 15 young masters, the fight against the Xiongnu is not something that can be said so simply. Ying Zifeng ignored the words and said calmly, I know that the Xiongnu had many horses, mostly cavalry, coming and going like the wind, while my soldiers in the Great Qin were mostly infantry. Although cavalry also had them, their skills on horseback were far inferior to those of the Xiongnu. In addition, the long battle line consumed a lot of energy in all aspects, so the empire has always been in a passive defense against the Xiongnu. The crowd, who were originally mocking Ying Zifeng for his shallow knowledge, became somewhat surprised when they heard his words and looked at him. Since Ying Zifeng knew the gap between them and the Xiongnu, why would he still tell a joke like killing all the Xiongnu? Just as everyone was puzzled, Ying Zheng frowned and asked, Zifeng, since you know so much about the Xiongnu, why would you still say things like before? Ying Zifeng turned his head to look at Ying Zheng and replied, because I have a way to let the combat ability of my Qin iron cavalry crush the Xiongnu cavalry. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Ying Zheng immediately asked, are you serious about this? Ying Zifeng nodded and replied, what I said is naturally the truth. Seeing Ying Zifeng's confidence, Ying Zheng immediately asked, how long will it take you to get this done? Ying Zifeng answered seriously, it won't be long, it's just a matter of the blink of an eye. This is impossible. Before Ying Zheng could speak, Hai had already shouted loudly. Although he is ignorant and inexperienced, he still has a lot of knowledge about equestrianism. Given the current situation of the Great Qin Empire, it would take at least a year to cultivate a qualified cavalry. Ying Zifeng said that he could instantly increase the combat power of the Great Qin iron cavalry by 10 times, which in his opinion was pure nonsense. Not only did Hai feel that this was impossible, but even the brave and skilled generals Meng Tian and Wang Ben felt that Ying Zifeng's words were too childish and were telling another joke. With the military strength of the Qin Empire, even those with exceptional talents would need at least a year and a half to become qualified cavalry. If you want this qualified cavalry to reach the combat level of the Xiongnu cavalry, it will inevitably require extensive battlefield training, and without 3 to 5 years of hard work, you may not be able to do it. At first, Meng Tian and Wang Ben had expectations for Ying Zifeng's words, but now, they only have greater disappointment in their hearts after their expectations fall through. As Hai said, instantly enhancing the cavalry's combat power to the level of crushing the Xiongnu cavalry. This is impossible. Hai excitedly walked up to the first emperor and said, Father, since 15 brother is so confident, why not let my son and 15 brother fight on horseback? If 15 brother can defeat my son, it proves that 15 brother's words are true. If he cannot win, Father, please accuse 15 brother of spreading rumors and slander. In Hai's view, Ying Zifeng was simply talking nonsense to gain the attention of the first emperor. He wants to use practical actions to expose Ying Zifeng's lies and make Emperor Shi punish him severely to vent his hatred. Emperor Shi glanced at Hai and then turned his gaze to Ying Zifeng, asking calmly, Zifeng, what do you think? Although Hai was very lazy, he was forced to learn equestrian skills from a young age, and his horseback skills were barely decent. On the other hand, Ying Zifeng was physically weak since childhood and had never practiced martial arts, let alone learned equestrian skills. However, if Ying Zifeng really had a way to increase the combat power of the Great Qin Iron Cavalry tenfold in an instant, he must have improved his equestrian skills casually and could have defeated Hu Hai. Faced with the oppressive gaze of Emperor Shi, Ying Zifeng nodded and said, "I am willing to compete with my 18th brother, but this battle will not take place until tomorrow." Upon hearing this, Ying Zheng immediately waved his hand and said, "Accurate." After the meeting ends, Ying Zifeng returned to his side hall. He took a piece of bamboo and carved it on it with a small knife. After a moment, he handed the carved bamboo pieces to Zhang Han standing beside him and said, "General Zhang, could you please help me find a blacksmith to make these 3 things? Please keep it confidential for now." Ying Zifeng warned Zhang Han, arched his hand and said, "No." In less than 2 hours, what happened in the Zhangtai palace spread throughout the court. Almost all the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty have heard that a few days ago, the 15th Prince Ying Zifeng, who presented the 6 flavors Emperor Pill on the birthday of the first emperor, praised Haikao for having a way to instantly enhance the combat power of the Qin Iron Cavalry and crush the Xiongnu cavalry. When they first heard this news, everyone thought it was a joke. In the eyes of everyone, unless Ying Zifeng was a heavenly deity descending to earth, how could he possibly possess such abilities? When they heard that Ying Zifeng would compete with Hu Hai in equestrian skills on the school field tomorrow morning, everyone became interested again. As is well known, Ying Zifeng is not good at horseback riding and archery, but has the courage to compete with Hu Hai on horseback. Is it true that there is some immortal means that cannot be achieved? For a moment, everyone was full of anticipation for the upcoming competition. Hu Hai has always disliked riding horses. But for tomorrow's competition, he specifically practiced his equestrian skills today. Zhao Gao stood on the side, watching Hu Hai practice horsemanship. During these few days, whenever he thought of the day at the birthday banquet of the first emperor, Ying Zifeng would make him kneel and beg for mercy with just one sentence. Almost losing his head, his face would become extremely ugly. So tomorrow, after Hu Hai defeats Ying Zifeng, he will definitely advise and request the first emperor to severely punish Ying Zifeng. Even if he does not kill Ying Zifeng, it is necessary to let Ying Zifeng lose a layer of skin. As for the possibility of Ying Zifeng winning by chance, Zhao Gaozhen never thought about it. How could a person who never knows how to ride a horse control equestrianism overnight? Chapter 6. Winning Magic. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next morning. Chenshi. Under the protection of a group of guards, Emperor Shi's vehicle slowly arrived at the campus. At this moment, the school field is already filled with courtiers who have come to watch this battle. When the courtiers saw the arrival of the first emperor, they all stepped forward to pay their respects. "I respectfully pay my respects to your majesty. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no need to be too polite." The first emperor, surrounded by Meng Tian, Wang Ben, Li Si, Zhao Gao, and the young master Fu Su, ascended the military podium to watch the competition between Ying Zifeng and Hu Hai. At this moment, Ying Zifeng and Hu Hai, as the main characters, each led their horses and stood at the base of the military station, waiting for the order of the first emperor. The horses led by Hu Hai were his own accustomed war horses, while the horses led by Ying Zifeng were the mounts of Zhang Han. "You're sure to lose." Hu Hai looked at Ying Zifeng and gritted his teeth fiercely. He was sure to make Ying Zifeng lose face today and completely become a laughing stock. Ying Zifeng seemed to have not heard Hu Hai's words, but just looked in the direction of the Dianbing platform, calm and composed. On the military platform, Ying Zheng sits down in front of a table full of fruits and dim sum, and then looks at Ying Zifeng and Hu Hai who are standing under the stage. His gaze only swept over Hu Hai and then stayed on Ying Zifeng. To put it correctly, he was not looking at Ying Zifeng, but at the warhorse he was holding in his hand. Compared to Hu Hai's warhorses, which only had reins, halters, and cushions, Ying Zifeng's warhorses clearly had more equipment. Ying Zifeng looked at the wooden leather-wrapped cushion on the back of the warhorse beside Ying Zifeng, and then glanced at the shoe-like thing that fell on either side of the cushion. He was quite curious and asked, "Zifeng, what is this thing on your horse?" Not only Ying Zifeng, but also Meng Tian and Wang Ben are curious about what these two things are used for. Ying Zifeng replied, "Tell your father, these are the saddles and stirrups." Ying Zifeng continued to ask, "What's the use of it?" Ying Zifeng did not immediately answer, but rather teased, saying, "I'll know when Father Emperor takes a look." At this moment, Hu-Hai, standing on the side, saw Ying Zifeng once again attracting the attention of the first emperor with his flashy actions. He immediately expressed some dissatisfaction and said, "Please order the Father Emperor to start the competition. He is already a bit eager to beat Ying Zifeng to pieces." Ying Zifeng saw the situation and didn't ask any more questions. He waved his hand and said, "You go prepare." With the command of Ying Zifeng, Ying Zifeng and Hu-Hai each led their warhorses towards both sides of the school field. They will mount their horses and charge each other at a distance of 100 steps, fighting with long wooden sticks, and the one who falls first will be defeated. 100 steps away, Ying Zifeng stepped on the dedicated steps for climbing the horse and flipped over to mount it. Hu-Hai grabbed the horse's back and suddenly flipped it over. Although it was not very stable, it was much more graceful than Ying Zifeng. The courtiers shook their heads when they saw the scene of the two people mounting their horses. From the perspective of mounting the horse alone, Ying Zifeng and Hu-Hai are far behind, which makes the courtiers who were not very optimistic about Ying Zifeng even more convinced that Hu-Hai will win. On the military platform, Ying Zifeng looked at Ying Zifeng and Hu-Hai and asked Meng Tian and Wang Ben beside him, "Do you think who will win this battle?" Meng Tian glanced at Ying Zifeng and then at Hu-Hai, and replied, "I thought that the 18 young master could win." Wang Ben followed suit and said, "I also feel the same way." Upon hearing the answers of these two generals, Ying Zifeng glanced at Ying Zifeng, who was calm and indifferent, but felt that the matter was not so simple. He waved his sleeve again, and the attendants shouted loudly, "The competition is starting." With the cries of the attendants, a fierce thunderous drumbeat immediately rang out on the campus. Under the stimulation of the drumbeat, Hu-Hai exerted force on his legs and forcefully squeezed his horse's belly. As soon as he started, he charged towards Ying Zifeng. I saw him sitting on the back of the horse, tightly grasping the reins with one hand and the wooden stick with the other. His body was fluctuating, but although it shook violently, fortunately it was still stable. On the other hand, when Hu-Hai started, Ying Zifeng almost started at the same time. He also used his legs to clamp the horse's belly with force, but because he had stirrups to borrow force, his strength was even greater. In an instant, the warhorse started and flew out like the wind. Meng Tian and Wang Ben, as experienced generals on the battlefield, changed their faces greatly when they saw Ying Zifeng and Hu-Hai activate. Because compared to their more optimistic Hu-Hai, Ying Zifeng sat more steadily and his horses ran faster. Just as they were surprised in their hearts, Ying Zifeng and Hu-Hai had already rushed towards each other. Hu-Hai held a wooden stick and stabbed straight at Ying Zifeng, but Ying Zifeng suddenly leaned back, releasing the reins with his left hand and gripping the stick tightly with both hands. With the tremendous force generated by the speed of the warhorse charging, he swept towards Hu-Hai. All of this happened between lightning and flint. Hu-Hai couldn't have imagined that Ying Zifeng would have such a bold move. Suddenly, even though he was fiercely swept in the chest by a wooden stick, he flew off the horse's back, spat out blood in his mouth, and fell to the ground with great force. Wow! Around the campus, the courtiers were all shocked to see this scene. Who would have thought that Hu-Hai, whom they all agreed on, could not even resist a single move in front of Ying Zifeng and was swept off his horse like this? If it weren't for Hu-Hai's leather armor protection, I'm afraid he would have died here. How could this be possible? Meng Tian and Wang Ben both looked shocked and exclaimed in surprise. They really didn't expect that Ying Zifeng could perform such a difficult action of loosening the reins and leaning back on the horse's back. Li Si, Zhao Gao, and Gongzi Fusu were equally shocked. Before witnessing this result with their own eyes, they could never imagine that Ying Zifeng, who had always been weak and not good at horsemanship, was so brave that with just one strike, Hu-Hai fell off his horse. Emperor Shi looked at Ying Zifeng, who was riding a horse, and was equally surprised in his heart. Although he had long guessed that Ying Zifeng might bring him a big surprise again, the surprise came too big. After being shocked, everyone became even more curious. How did Ying Zifeng do it? Ying Zifeng rode his warhorse slowly to the front of the military station, and only got off his horse after the soldiers had moved up the steps. He walked up to the front of the stage and saluted the first emperor, saying, "How does father feel about the behavior of his courtiers?" Emperor Shi stood up and stepped down from the military platform, while the others followed Emperor Shi down. Ying Zheng arrived at the warhorse and patted the saddle with his hand. He then picked up his stirrup and observed carefully, saying, "Did you defeat Hu-Hai with this saddle and stirrup?" Ying Zifeng smiled slightly and nodded, saying, "Not bad, I defeated my 18th brother with my saddle and stirrup." Ying Zifeng paused a little and said, "My father, my son and minister are not good at horsemanship, but they can defeat the 18 younger brothers who are good at riding with saddles and stirrups. If everyone in the Qin Dynasty mounts saddles and stirrups, why fear the Huns?" Chapter 7. Another Treasure. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When everyone heard Ying Zifeng's words, their faces changed dramatically. Yesterday they were still questioning Ying Zifeng, but today when they look back, they underestimate Ying Zifeng's intelligence and talent. If these saddles and stirrups are really as powerful as Ying Zifeng said, then it is indeed possible for the empire to kill all the Xiongnu. Thinking of these, everyone's gaze at Ying Zifeng couldn't help but become very complicated. Emperor Shi gave Ying Zifeng a deep glance, and then suddenly flipped over and mounted his horse. Amidst the exclamation of everyone, Emperor Shi had already galloped on his warhorse on the school field. Drive. Everyone was shocked as they watched the first emperor, who came and went like the wind, constantly making difficult movements on horseback. Although Emperor Shi was also skilled in horseback archery when he was young, he still held a high position and had not ridden horses for many years. Now, he can perform movements on horseback that even Meng Tian and Wang Ben find difficult to perform, which surprised everyone. At the same time, everyone also realized in their hearts that the reason why the first emperor showed such divine bravery was definitely related to the saddle and stirrup assembled on the war horse. Emperor Shi returned on horseback, got off his horse, and looked at the hot-eyed generals Meng Tian, Wang Ben, and Zhang Han, saying, "You also come and give it a try." Upon hearing this, Meng Tian immediately took a step forward, got on his horse first, and began to gallop on the school field. "Brother Meng, it's time for me." Wang Ben couldn't help but show a look of eagerness as he watched Meng Tian's brave performance. Meng Tian laughed and returned, shouting, "It's so great! It's so great!" Upon seeing Meng Tian return, Wang Ben and Zhang Han mounted their horses one after another and experienced it. This experience immediately made them fall in love with something called a stirrup. Emperor Shi looked at the excited faces of Meng Tian, Wang Ben, and Zhang Han and asked, "How do you feel, three beloved ministers?" Meng Tian bowed and said, "Report to your majesty, these saddles and stirrups are truly the divine weapons of cavalry." Wang Ben also followed suit and said, "Your majesty, with this saddle and stirrup, I will sit more steadily on the horse's back, use more strength, and be more relaxed." Zhang Han replied, "With this saddle and stirrup, the imperial cavalry will be invincible." Emperor Shi personally experienced the benefits of this saddle and stirrup, and naturally understood how great the appearance of this saddle and stirrup could bring to the iron cavalry of the Great Qin. If the whole army is equipped with saddles and stirrups, where the Qin cavalry passes, who can defeat them? With these thoughts in mind, Emperor Shi turned his gaze to Ying Zifeng and said, "This is the method you mentioned that can greatly enhance the combat power of the imperial cavalry." Upon hearing the words of Emperor Shi, everyone turned their heads and looked at Ying Zifeng. Before this, they believed that it would take at least 3 to 5 years for the empire to cultivate an elite cavalry capable of fighting against the Xiongnu cavalry. But now with saddles and stirrups, the battle effectiveness of imperial cavalry can be greatly improved immediately. After adapting, it's no problem to crush the Huns. Faced with the complex gaze of the crowd, Ying Zifeng shook his head and said, "These are not enough. General Zhang, could you please lift the horse's hooves?" Upon hearing this, Zhang Han immediately lifted the hind hooves of the warhorse. Everyone leaned over and looked curiously at the horse's hooves, then saw that there seemed to be a piece of iron embedded on top of the hooves. "This is..." Emperor Shi looked at Ying Zifeng and seemed eager to get an answer. Ying Zifeng smiled and replied, "This thing is called horseshoe iron, also known as horseshoe, which can be used to protect horse hooves." Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's answer, Meng Tian immediately showed a surprised expression on his face and shouted repeatedly, "Wonderful! It's really amazing!" Ying Zifeng continued, "If a person walks or even runs barefoot on the ground, they will definitely scratch their feet, making it impossible to move quickly. This is also true for horses. Therefore, the courtiers thought of putting a pair of shoes on horses to protect their hooves from injury. In this way, the imperial war horses can serve for a long time." When everyone heard Ying Zifeng's explanation, their eyes couldn't help but light up. Throughout history, the limitation of cavalry combat effectiveness has not only been the high difficulty of fighting on horseback, but also the damage to the hooves of horses during long journeys. Once the hooves of the horses are severely damaged, they must be eliminated, which makes it difficult for imperial cavalry to develop to a certain scale due to the limitation of the number of horses. But now with horseshoe iron to protect the hooves from damage, war horses can serve for a long time, and imperial cavalry will definitely have tremendous development in the future. Ying Zifeng looked at the excited look on everyone's faces and saluted. "My son and minister will present this saddle, stirrup and horseshoe to the father emperor to help him sweep the Huns, and never suffer." Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Ying Zheng burst out laughing and said, "Okay. Great. My son Feng is truly a pillar of the empire." The courtiers saw the first emperor so happy and came forward to congratulate him. "Congratulations your majesty, congratulations your majesty." Just as everyone was congratulating the first emperor, a mournful cry suddenly came from not far away. "Father, father! Father, please make decisions for your children." Hu-Hai, who had a bruised face and bruised nose after falling, walked closer with the help of the soldiers and cried to the first emperor with tears and a runny nose. As he spoke, he knelt down in front of Emperor Shi. He was about to say something more aggrieved, but Emperor Shi kicked him away with a kick. At this moment, the only thing in the eyes of the first emperor was the horseshoe iron that could help the Great Qin Empire sweep the Xiongnu, and there was no need to worry about Hu-Hai. "Emperor Shi! Get up, don't block me from appreciating horseshoes." "Hu-Hai! What? Father's love, disappearing so suddenly." Before noon, the first emperor issued an imperial edict to summon all blacksmiths and carpenters in Guanzhong to forge saddles, stirrups and horseshoes for imperial cavalry. The originally planned plan of Meng Tian leading his army to launch a northern attack on the Xiongnu had another twist, as Wang Ben suddenly changed his mind and wanted to participate in this battle. At first, Wang Ben thought that this battle would be very difficult, so if Meng Tian was willing to go, let him go. But now, with saddles, stirrups and horseshoes, the imperial cavalry's combat power has been rapidly improved, showing the posture of sweeping the Huns. Naturally, he wants to participate in it and share some of the battle achievements. Emperor Shi looked at the two of Meng Tian and Wang Ben, who were in a constant dispute. Originally, they were a bit big-headed, but Ying Zifeng suggested that Meng Tian and Wang Ben attack together in a lightning-fast battle against the Xiongnu, which quelled the dispute. Therefore, both Meng Tian and Wang Ben are particularly pleased to see Ying Zifeng, the 15 young master, nowadays. And this incident truly brought Ying Zifeng, who had always been neglected, into the view of important officials from all sides of the empire. Chapter 8. Showcasing Unique Skills. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. While the Empire's campaign to create a three-piece horse set was in full swing, Ying Zifeng continued to refine the 6 flavors Emperor pills for the first emperor in a daily routine. Compared to the past, the attitude of Emperor Shi towards Ying Zifeng can be said to be very kind and rare in showing his fatherly side. And this is naturally attributed to Ying Zifeng's tremendous contributions to the first emperor himself and the imperial cavalry. On this day, after offering pills, Ying Zifeng returned to the side hall as usual. Unexpectedly, on the way back, I met Fusu. Big brother. Ying Zifeng took the initiative to bow to Fusu. Fusu looked at Ying Zifeng with a complex expression and said, I wonder if 15 brother has time to go out for a walk with big brother. Ying Zifeng gently raised his eyebrows and nodded, saying, sure. Although he didn't know why Fusu suddenly invited him to walk around, there probably wouldn't be any danger. Ying Zifeng followed behind Fusu and walked out towards the outside of the palace. Soon, they arrived at the construction site of the new palace. At this time, it is winter, but tens of thousands of workers are busy at the construction site. They were thin and frail, with a waxy yellow complexion and inadequate clothing. They were already shivering with cold, but they were still forced to work hard under the long whip of the supervising sergeant. In order to lift a 1,000-pound boulder, more than 10 people were mobilized. Although their bodies were tired, they still exerted all their strength, blood and sweat flowing, staining the boulder, which was shocking. However, after only 2 steps, some of them collapsed due to physical exhaustion, but had to force themselves to stand up again under the whip of the supervising sergeant. The commoners who fell one after another and could no longer stand up were carried out of the construction site by their companions and abandoned in a nearby open space. And there, the bodies have piled up like mountains. Everyone looked at the corpse mountain and seemed numb. This kind of thing is happening on every inch of land at the construction site. Looking at the scene before him, Fusu's face showed an expression of unbearable anger. He turned to Ying Zifeng and asked, 15 younger brothers, how do you feel when you see this scene? Ying Zifeng looked at the scene before him and was also somewhat stunned. Although in the past, he had seen more than once in books about the difficult lives of the people of the Great Qin Empire, this was the first time he had seen such a scene with his own eyes. As a normal person with flesh and blood, it is natural to feel a bit unbearable. After hearing Fusu's question, Ying Zifeng understood Fusu's intention. Fusu wanted him to come forward and persuade Emperor Shi to suspend the construction of the palace, repatriate the people, and rest and recuperate. Fusu looked at Ying Zifeng with a complex expression and said, Zifeng, the emperor's favorite now is you. If you were to persuade the emperor, he might listen. Ying Zifeng turned his head to look at Fusu, remained silent, and turned around to leave. Upon seeing Ying Zifeng leave, Fusu thought that as a high-ranking official, Ying Zifeng did not understand the people and dared not disobey Emperor Shi. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh and shed tears on the spot. Zhongtai Palace. The first emperor is reviewing the memorial. The black ice platform security guard walked slowly and relayed the scene they had seen at the construction site to Emperor Shi. When Emperor Shi heard that Fusu was taking Ying Zifeng to the construction site to observe the miserable situation of the people, hoping that Ying Zifeng could advise, suspend construction, repatriate the people, and rest, Emperor Shi's face suddenly darkened. After hearing that Ying Zifeng remained silent, did not agree to support Su, and turned around to leave, Emperor Shi couldn't help but frown. During this period, due to Ying Zifeng's outstanding performance, Emperor Shi was very fond of his son, and even had the idea of appointing him as the crown prince. However, as the emperor of the Great Qin Empire following him, we cannot be too lenient, nor can we be too cold-blooded. Although Ying Zifeng's performance in this matter cannot be miscalculated, he cannot be satisfied either. Let's observe and observe again. Ying Zheng ignored this moment and began to focus on reviewing the memorial. On the other hand, Ying Zifeng found Zhang Han as soon as he returned to the side hall. General Zhang, could you please go to the doctor's academy and help me find some Mahist PhDs? The next morning, Ying Zifeng came to Zhangtai Palace with Lu Wei imperial pill and fermented sour milk made from ground mung bean while gold to offer pills to the first emperor. The first emperor took the pills rolled into small pills and gave them to Ying Zifeng with fermented sour milk made from ground mung bean while gold, then looked at Ying Zifeng who had not left and asked, "Why don't you step down?" Ying Zifeng bowed and said, "Father, this afternoon, I want to showcase a unique skill to father in the civil and military forces of the Manchu dynasty." After gaining experience with the horse three-piece set, Emperor Shi became very interested in all of Ying Zifeng's actions. When he heard that Ying Zifeng was about to showcase a unique skill, he immediately asked curiously, "What skill?" Ying Zifeng replied, "Lift 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand." Emperor Shi couldn't help but be stunned when he heard Ying Zifeng's words. He suspected that there was something wrong with his ears and couldn't help but ask, "Lift 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand. You?" Ying Zifeng nodded and replied, "Not bad, it's my son." After receiving confirmation, Emperor Shi gave Ying Zifeng a deep glance and said, "Okay, I will gather my courtiers to watch your performance this afternoon." Upon hearing this, Ying Zifeng immediately arched his hand and said, "Thank you, father." With the order of Emperor Shi, the news that Ying Zifeng would personally perform lifting 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand this afternoon immediately spread in the city of Xiongnu. Upon hearing this news, the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty instinctively believed it was a joke. The difficulty of this one-handed giant tripod weighing 1,000 pounds far exceeds defeating Hu Hai on horseback. You should know that even Meng Tian and Wang Ben, who are brave and skilled in battle, cannot lift 1,000-pound cauldron with both hands, let alone with one hand. So among the courtiers, almost no one believed that Ying Zifeng could achieve this. However, as this was an order from the first emperor, everyone could only set off to the school field to see what tricks Ying Zifeng was going to do again. Shinshi. At the call of Emperor Shi, the courtiers once again gathered on the school field. On the open space in the center of the school field, there is a bronze cauldron that is 1 person tall. Just by looking at its volume, it can be inferred that the weight of this cauldron is definitely over 1,000 pounds. This makes the courtiers somewhat curious. What medicine does Ying Zifeng sell in this gourd? Just as the courtiers were curious, the carriage of Emperor Shi arrived. Like last time, Emperor Shi climbed onto the military platform and sat down, then turned his gaze to Ying Zifeng who was following him. "Zifeng, I have invited all the beloved ministers according to your wishes. Let's start your performance now." Upon hearing Emperor Shi's words, Ying Zifeng was about to speak when Hu Hai suddenly stood up and shouted loudly, "Father, I have objections." Chapter 9. One hand lifting the cauldron. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Since the last time he lost to Ying Zifeng on the school field and was kicked by the first emperor, Hu Hai has been greatly affected both physically and mentally. The name Ying Zifeng has almost become his heart demon. Today, when he heard that Ying Zifeng was going to perform lifting 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand, his first reaction was that it was impossible. However, thinking of Ying Zifeng's last performance, he felt that there was a trick involved. Quickly, he relied on his intelligence to see through Ying Zifeng's conspiracies and schemes. This 1,000-pound tripod must be fake. Emperor Shi looked at Hu Hai and frowned, asking, "Do you have any objections?" I don't know why, but since his birthday, he looks at his former favorite little son and feels increasingly disgusted. At this moment, Ying Zifeng was about to perform a powerful miracle when Hu Hai jumped out to cause trouble, which inevitably made him feel a bit unhappy. Hu Hai looked at the first emperor and said seriously, "Father, the 15th brother is weak. Even the last time he defeated his son, it was because of the saddle and stirrup. His personal strength is only 100 kilograms. How can he carry this huge tripod?" Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, Emperor Shi asked, "What do you want to express?" Hu Hai continued, my son believes that brother 15 is definitely trying to make things mysterious. This cauldron must be fake. Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, the surrounding courtiers couldn't help but look at each other and then turn their gaze to the giant cauldron placed in the center of the school field. After careful consideration, what Hu Hai said was not without any reason. No matter how he looks at it, Ying Zifeng doesn't have the strength to lift 1,000 pounds of heavy cauldron. Hu Hai looked smugly at Ying Zifeng standing beside him and said, I suggest checking the giant cauldron to verify its authenticity. If it is found that the giant cauldron is fake, then Ying Zifeng has committed the crime of deceiving the king. At that time, even if Ying Zifeng is favored no matter how much, he will have to take off a layer of skin if he doesn't die. He didn't believe that Ying Zifeng had committed such a heinous crime, and Emperor Shi could continue to dote on Ying Zifeng. Upon hearing Hu Hai's words, Emperor Shi turned his head to look at Ying Zifeng and asked, Zifeng, what do you think? Ying Zifeng smiled confidently and said, the tripod is right there, and anyone can verify its authenticity. Hu Hai was surprised to see Ying Zifeng so confident. Could it be that this cauldron was real? Can this guy really lift this 1,000-pound cauldron? I don't believe it. Speaking, Hu Hai walked down the stage and headed towards the giant cauldron. He came to the cauldron and reached out to grab the edge and base, exerting strong force. But he put all his energy into nursing, but the giant cauldron remained motionless. At this moment, Meng Tian and Wang Ben were also ordered to come and lift their cauldrons vigorously. With the strength of the two of them, it was simply impossible to lift the giant cauldron slightly off the ground. Upon seeing the situation, the courtiers immediately began to discuss. This cauldron is real. It's really a tripod weighing 1,000 pounds. General Meng and General Wang can't lift it, this must be true. How can 15 young masters lift this cauldron? Who knows? As everyone was discussing, Ying Zifeng looked at Hu Hai with a resentful expression on his face and asked with a smile, have you verified the authenticity of your 18th brother? Hu Hai looked at the smile on Ying Zifeng's face and couldn't help but itch with hatred. He immediately shouted, I don't believe you can lift this 1,000-pound cauldron with one hand. If you can really lift it, then I'll eat it. Ying Zifeng chuckled and said, that's a deal. As he spoke, Ying Zifeng walked down the stage and waved to the Mahist doctor who came with him, saying, you guys, it's time to work. At the invitation of Ying Zifeng, the several Mahist doctors immediately took ropes and walked to the cauldron with the soldiers carrying thick wooden sticks, starting to play with them. Everyone saw this scene with a puzzled expression on their faces. What was this supposed to do? After a moment, under the curious gaze of everyone, a simplified version of the lever was built. And this lever is precisely the key to Ying Zifeng's confidence in lifting 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand. After the other end of the rope was tied firmly to the cauldron, Ying Zifeng walked to the other end and grabbed the rope hanging from his long arm with one hand. Under the curious and puzzled gaze of everyone, Ying Zifeng suddenly pulled the rope with force. As his long arm moved, the 1,000-pound heavy tripod tied to his short arm slowly left the ground. Creak, creak. As Ying Zifeng continued to exert force, his long arms became lower and lower, and the 1,000-pound heavy cauldron on the other side was also lifted higher and higher. On the podium, everyone couldn't help but open their mouths when they saw this scene. Lift it up. I really lifted it up. Everyone couldn't help but exclaim in surprise as they watched the scene before them. This is really unbelievable. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Hu Hai exclaimed in surprise, unable to believe it. Ying Zifeng really lifted that 1,000-pound heavy cauldron with just one arm. Even the first emperor, who had high expectations for Ying Zifeng, was extremely shocked at this moment. He didn't understand how such a simple wooden frame helped Ying Zifeng lift up this 1,000-pound heavy cauldron. In shock among the courtiers, Ying Zifeng slowly released the rope in his hand, put down the cauldron, and then said to the crowd, anyone can lift the cauldron up with this. Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Emperor Shi immediately stood up and walked towards the audience. The courtiers immediately followed Emperor Shi over. Emperor Shi followed Ying Zifeng's instructions to pull the rope, and indeed lifted the 1,000-pound heavy cauldron once again. Everyone tried one by one, and everyone who tried was amazed by it. The task of lifting the cauldron was supposed to be exclusive to Hercules, but now it has been transformed into something that everyone can do by Ying Zifeng. It's amazing, it's really amazing. Hu-Hai mixed among the crowd and also lifted the tripod through leverage. He looked at the giant cauldron being lifted, and there was really a feeling of being in a dream. How did he actually do it? Not only Hu-Hai was extremely curious about this matter, but everyone present was extremely curious about the lever. Emperor Shi asked directly, "What is this?" Ying Zifeng smiled slightly and said, "Father, this thing is called a lever, also known as the lever principle. Mozi of the Mahist school recorded this principle as early as possible." Immediately, Ying Zifeng briefly explained to everyone about the principle of leverage. Although everyone heard it in confusion, they basically understood that this is a principle that allows people to lift heavy things with very little force, and it is still very interesting. Ying Zifeng glanced at the expressions of amazement on everyone's faces, and then turned his gaze to Hu-Hai, whose face was extremely ugly and mixed in with the crowd. He smiled and asked Hu-Hai, 18 younger brothers, "Are you planning to eat this cauldron raw or cooked?" Chapter 10. Liberate the labor force. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When everyone heard Ying Zifeng's words, they couldn't help but turn their heads and look at Hu-Hai in the crowd. Previously, Hu-Hai danced happily and didn't believe that Ying Zifeng could lift 1,000 caddies tripod with one hand. He even vowed that if Ying Zifeng did, he would eat the tripod. Now that Ying Zifeng has truly accomplished this feat, it is also Hu-Hai's turn to eat the cauldron. Faced with the gaze of the crowd, Hu-Hai's face suddenly turned pig liver red. In order to conceal his guilt, he shouted loudly, "Isn't it just lifting the cauldron? What's so remarkable?" Ying Zifeng gave Hu-Hai a deep glance and said, "The remarkable thing about this matter is not about lifting a cauldron." As he spoke, Ying Zifeng turned his head to look at the first emperor and said, "Father, if we promote this lever principle and use it to transport giant stones for the construction of palaces and water conservancy, I wonder how much manpower can be saved." As Ying Zifeng's words fell, everyone at the scene showed a look of shock on their faces. Originally, like Hu-Hai, they thought this lever was just an interesting toy, but after hearing Ying Zifeng's words, they realized that the principle of this lever was very useful. Among the crowd, Fusu looked even more excited and cheered. "If this lever principle can be used to build palaces and water conservancy, at least hundreds of thousands of manpower can be saved." The most labor-intensive process in building palaces and water conservancy projects is the handling of stone and wood. 1,000-pound boulder requires at least a dozen people to move, but with this lever, things that originally required a dozen people to do can be done with just one person. In this way, the palace that originally required 300,000 laborers to build may only require tens of thousands of people, and the same goes for water conservancy projects. The saved laborers can then let them return to their hometowns, cultivate wasteland, and rest. The contradiction between the court and the people will also be greatly eased. Among the crowd present, no one was a fool. After Ying Zifeng pointed out the use of this lever principle, everyone immediately understood Ying Zifeng's good intentions. They looked at Ying Zifeng's gaze one by one, which could truly be said to be astonishing. The first emperor's gaze at Ying Zifeng revealed an undisguised appreciation. "Okay. Great. Ying Zheng is very happy. He hasn't been so happy in many years." He never expected that Ying Zifeng could bring himself so many huge surprises one after another. He immediately ordered and said to Fusu, "Fusu, I will entrust you with promoting the principle of leverage. Do you have any objections?" Fusu was already lenient, thinking day and night about how to alleviate the suffering of the people. Now that we see the principle of leverage and hope, we naturally wish to implement it immediately. After hearing the order of the first emperor, he immediately bowed and said, I will definitely live up to what my father entrusted me. Speaking, Fu Su couldn't help but turn his head and take a look at Ying Zifeng. Yesterday, he thought that Ying Zifeng was cold and ruthless, not caring for the people. Now it seems that he has wrongly blamed Ying Zifeng. Compared to him who only knows how to advise, Ying Zifeng is the one who can truly make the people of the world live a good life. Ying Zifeng noticed the guilty and grateful gaze that Fu Su looked at, chuckled, and then turned to Hu Hai, whose face turned pale. 18 younger brothers, do you still think this thing is useless now? Upon hearing Ying Zifeng's words, Hu Hai opened his mouth and said, I. Emperor Shi looked at Hu Hai's comical appearance and his face immediately darkened. He said, I want you to study hard, but you only know how to stir up trouble all day, almost missing out on important matters of the empire. I will punish you for a month and not allowing you to leave the palace for half a step. You will handwrite Han Fizi 100 times. Hu Hai saw the first emperor getting angry and immediately trembled with fear. He knelt down on the ground and dared not say anything again. Immediately after, the first emperor turned his gaze to Zhao Gao among the crowd and said, Zhao Gao, I trust you to become a teacher of Hu Hai. But look, what kind of student have you taught me? I will punish you with another 3 years of salary. If Hu Hai still hasn't made progress in the future, you are the only one asking. Zhao Gao. I just stood in the crowd and watched the excitement. Why did I inexplicably lose my 3-year salary? Under the strong promotion of Fusu, hundreds of Mahist PhDs and numerous disciples took action to study and upgrade leverage, promote leverage, and strive to apply the principle of leverage in more places to replace more manpower. The people who were originally building palaces were numb and even completely devastated, but when they heard that the court would soon replace manpower with tools called levers and send them back to their hometowns, they were all excited and burst into tears. Woo-woo. Finally, you can go home. I want to go home, I want to go home now. The court finally understands us common people. I will never say anything wrong about the court again in the future. The people, seeing that they can finally go home, are all grateful to the court. They used to think that if the 6 countries were restored, perhaps they wouldn't have to endure so much hardship. And now, after getting the opportunity to go home, they no longer think about these things. As for Ying Zifeng, he specifically reminded Fu Su not to mention his name when promoting this matter. Although letting the people know that the principle of leverage was developed by him can definitely bring him great reputation, after all, the first emperor is still alive. What would the first emperor feel if he saw that the people were all grateful and tearful towards him, but ignored the first emperor? Therefore, before the first emperor explicitly wanted to support him in ascending to power, it would be best for him to do something quietly, brush his clothes, and hide his achievements and fame as the 15 young master. Fusu also understood the principles behind it, so when promoting this matter to appease the people, he deliberately concealed the name of Ying Zifeng, only stating that it was an order from the first emperor. After the voices of the people were organized and sent to the desk of the first emperor, he looked at the records of the people's gratitude towards him, and his dignified face couldn't help but show a hint of satisfaction. At the same time, he also breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. In the past, both in the doctoral palace and among the common people, there were many corrupt scholars who caused trouble by his recruitment of commoners, spreading rumors that he was a tyrant. Although he didn't care, he knew in his heart that there were also grievances in the hearts of the people. Nowadays, with the emergence of leverage, not only have the grievances dissipated in the hearts of the people, but they are also grateful to the court. This is also a good thing for the long-term stability of the empire. Thinking of these, Ying Zheng couldn't help but think of Ying Zifeng. Zifeng, how many surprises do you have that I don't know?